Hello, everybody. Welcome. You are now on the Lutherans Restoring Creation call, Connections call. I know we keep calling it a call, even though we went to Zoom years ago, but it's still a call. It's a calling. We're all together. We're connecting. I'm so grateful for Baird and Kaylie, who decided to share with us this evening a little bit more about Sabbath, which I think we can all continually grow on. Even if you're somebody who has to work on what everybody else considers a Sabbath, I think that everyone needs to learn a little bit more about what Sabbath really means for you. And I think that's what they're here to help us with, and how it relates to climate and the climate catastrophe that we're in, that there's a piece of Sabbath that will actually help heal us all, including the planet. Before we get into that, and as people are still coming on, I'm going to read. We have a couple minutes, Baird and Kaylie, if I read this whole thing. I was lucky enough, by the way, I'm Phoebe Morad. Hi, I'm director of Lutherans Restoring Creation, and I probably asked many of you to be here, so that's how you know me. I had the fortune of going to a retreat this past week led by the BTS Center and the Center for Spirituality and Nature. And at the end of it, we were read this that has stuck with me, and I wanted to hear it again. It is by Laura Johnson, and it was found in the December issue of Resilience. I think it's a good way to open. I want everything to pause. I want us to pause long enough to notice the patterns of harm and the systems of oppression that continue to multiply. And I want us to pause long enough to recognize our responsibility to interrupt them. I want us to pause long enough to make space for our grief. That was from Michelle Cassandra Johnson in Finding Refuge, Heart Work for Healing Collective Grief. It's clear that our times are urgent. Growing social and environmental crises everywhere, linked at their deep cultural roots, squeeze us from all sides. Scientists have been telling us for years that our time to act is dwindling, nearly gone, already gone. In such urgent times, should not our response be similarly urgent? Should we not move faster, yell louder, do more? Why then does Bayu Akamolafe advise that the times are very urgent? We must slow down. Why is Michelle Cassandra Johnson calling for a pause? Why are Octavia Rahim and Tricia Hersey advocating for rest? Adrienne Marie Brown for pleasure and slowness. As she puts it in Emergent Strategy, there is such urgency in the multitude of crises we face. It can make it hard to remember that, in fact, it is the urgency thinking that got us to this point, and that our potential success lies in doing deep, slow, intentional work. Urgency thinking, scarcity thinking, the logic of capitalism. There isn't enough, not enough time, not enough space, not enough resources. So then we'll take what we can. We'll accumulate as much as we can and enclose it within borders and fences and walls. We'll control and compete. We'll be productive and efficient. Rest is lazy. Emotions are fragile. The earth is dead. Pleasure is for later, or not meant for me. For centuries, these myths have put the world and living, breathing bodies into production for accumulation of wealth, for the elite, power for the few, disposability for the many. The myth of scarcity has led us to this urgent and heartbreaking place where we live in the stress response, disembodied, shallow breath, nervous systems fried, rest deprived. There isn't enough time, we say. No time to feel the collective grief that grows as we try to turn away. We're separate, fragmented. Isn't that what they say? Why then would I feel this pain for the earth and other beings? Consider, might this be a sign of our innate compassion, of interconnection and interdependence, the tugs and taps of consciousness, relational awareness, whispers of deep knowing and community care. As Malkay Devich Cyril says, grief is the opposite of indifference. oh, well, what am I supposed to do with that? It's too much. And anyway, there still isn't enough time. But what if there were? What if the truth was abundance? What if pausing, slowing down, feeling could re-embed this truth in our bodies and in the world? What if we could soften into this spaciousness? Can we imagine? What if right now we could pause, take a full breath, relax our jaw, feel our heart, let our minds quiet, our bodies rest? There. This is your invitation. Rest is an abundance practice, writes Octavia Rahim. It is inherently spacious. Rest increases your capacity to be with and feel all of your feelings. Rest increases your capacity for true intimacy, pleasure, and joy. So let us rest. You are invited. Let us rest to feel and metabolize the heavy emotions, vital feedback, deep reminders, wisdom holders, sacred guides. Let us rest to deprogram from grind culture and urgency thinking, to regulate our nervous system so that we might process and be transformed. Let us rest to wake up and to wake down, returning to our bodies and through them to the earth. Let us rest to disrupt capitalism and its intertwined systems of supremacy and oppression, colonialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, heterosexism, anthropocentrism. Let us interrupt them. Let us rest to remember abundance, to notice the beauty and magic all around us, to open to wonder and awe. Let us rest to cultivate softness and spaciousness in our bodies and in the world. Let us rest to process our compounded grief as ritual, relational practice. Let us rest for resilience so that we can show up for the deep intentional work of our times. Let us rest, as Tricia Hersey says, because it is our birthright, because we are alive, and that is enough. But how do we rest? Perhaps we have forgotten. Rest is not just sleep, it is a way of being, ease. As with anything that no longer comes naturally, we need to practice. We need a practice. We need rest practice, feeling practice, grieving practice, relational practice. Much is made of what we must do, but little is being made of how we must live and who we must become. I'm going to share that article with you all. I'm sorry, as a Bostonian, I said that all way too fast. So I'd like you to be able to read that at your leisure. And I hope it opened the stage for Baird and Kaylie to be able to share with us more of that invitation and how to practice some of what that preaches.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. Really appreciate that introduction. I want to give a brief kind of outline of what you can expect from this conversation before we start moving through. We're going to start with just some time to speak your name into the space. We're going to try, ironically, to move relatively quickly through that so that we can hear each other's voices, hopefully, before we get into smaller groups where we can get into deeper conversation. Following that, Kaylie and I will talk a bit about what the Sabbath is, spiritually speaking, and some of its history, as well as how we have been thinking about applying it into our lives today, and what the Sabbath and spiritual practices like the Sabbath have to do with confronting the crisis of climate change. We will move from that into just a brief time to respond if there are any things that you just kind of reflexively want to speak into the space. We'll have a couple minutes for people to respond that way before going into breakout rooms and being able to get into deeper conversation with one another. we'll have about 10 minutes in breakout rooms to chat with folks, both your reactions to the presentation, and we have some questions to kind of guide your conversation. And then following those breakout rooms, we'll have a chance to follow up in the large group as well. Speak anything that seemed important from your group or something that really you think you're going to be chewing on for a while from your breakout rooms or with that reflection for the good of the group. And then we'll send you off in a prayer. So before we get into introductions, there's one last thing that I want to mention. I had a calculus teacher in high school who was so talented at math that it didn't quite occur to him that people struggled with calculus. And when you'd ask him to walk you through the process of solving a problem, he would do it on the board, and then you would know what it looked like when the problem was solved, but not how to solve the problem. Kaylie and I are not that math teacher when it comes to Sabbath practice. We are not the ones who can make it look easy or anything remotely like that. So with that caveat, as we're going into this, the awareness that we are far from experts, both in the history and culture of Sabbath. That's something that we've been educating ourselves on. And even further from being experts in the direct application in our lives. We are practitioners, but not experts by any means, which is to say that we're learners as well. So I think that often I go into conversations about spiritual practices and I feel like I'm watching that calculus teacher do his business up on the board, and I'm still left there being like, okay, cool. So this is a thing that's for superheroes and maybe not for me. I want to try and lower the pressure on that. We are also figuring it out. So as you're hearing things that sound challenging or overwhelming, we're right there with you. Just want to flag that to begin with. So my name is Baird. I'm a vicar intern at Lord of Life Lutheran Church here in Chagrin Falls, Ohio, and I'm a candidate for ministry in the ELCA through the Montana Synod. And I've been working with LRC for the last year or so, and I will kick it off to popcorn. Whoever wants to jump in after can speak their name into the room. I'm really happy to be here, and I'll leave it open for, let's go with Kaylie actually first so that she gets, who's talking to you before we get too deep into it.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being on this call with us. My name is Kaylie Ines. I'm an ordained minister in the ELCA. I serve 2 rural congregations out in Kansas. I also sit on the board of Lutherans Restoring Creation and do various work with our mission table here in Kansas for Lutherans Restoring Creation as well. So super glad to be on this call with you all and to be able to present some of our work here. So with that, we'll just do, if you guys want to do just briefly your name and where you're calling in from, that would be great. And I guess I'll kick it. Thor, you are like the next box on my screen, so I'll kick it to you if that's okay.
Good evening. My name is Tor Olsen. I have the Germanic pronunciation instead of the Norwegian. I live in the Seattle metro area in Washington State. And tonight I'm representing the GNOICC of New Orleans, Climate Reality, several chapters, the National Snow and Ice Data Center, which has a lot of my peers, and the Geologic View of Climate Change. I'm going to pass it to Stephen Hendrickson.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Hendrickson. I'm from Santa Cruz, California, and I have just joined a biodynamic farmers group, and it's amazing what's happening in that whole realm. Thank you. Let's see, how about Sharon? Sharon Samoska?
Yep, Sharon Samoska from Waterbury, Connecticut.
Samoska.
I work with Naugatuck Valley Project on environmental issues. I am chairperson of our social advocacy committee, and we are starting a pollinator garden this summer. So glad to be here.
I'll kick it to Bob Aritz after that.
Hello, Bob Aritz. I'm from Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and I'm on the Church and Society Committee for the Southwestern Pennsylvania Synod of the ELCA, member of their creation care team. And you popcorn it.
Thanks, Bob. I'll kick it to Carl Teinert.
Well, kudos to you, Baird. You pronounced it right. Carl
One
Tyner.
person with a
I'm
hard name to another.
Okay, Carl Tyner. I'm calling in from Austin, Texas. And I'm semi-retired consulting geologist, mostly in environmental consulting. But right now, I guess what comes to my mind is that we're in the midst of one heck of a heat wave and has climate change written all over it. So how about Brother Ken?
Greetings, I'm Brother Ken. I'm a member of the Lutheran Franciscans Order. I'm also a pastor at St. Nicholas Lutheran in Huntingtown, Maryland, part of the Metro DC Synod. I happen to also be part of the Creation Justice team for this synod. Yeah, that's me. So I will call upon, I think her name is Jean. There. You're on mute, Jean.
I'm Jean Hazley from Athens, Ohio, from the Christ Lutheran Church, Lutheran Earth Justice Advocates group. And we have been meeting, I think, since 2006 and planning programs and actions that we can take for our church and our community.
Thanks so much, Jean. I'll kick it to Stephen Bumer.
Hi, I'm Steve Beamer. I'm a deacon at St. John Evangelical Lutheran Church in Winter Park, Florida, home of the world's greatest sargassum algae dump that's killing our beaches. But anyway, we plan on an environmentally focused God's Work Our Hands Day with a couple of projects in September.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. Let's kick it to Marty Haug.
My name's Marty Haug. I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan, and just an interested citizen.
Awesome. Thanks, Marty. Let's go with Kathy Reese.
I'm Kathy Reese from Buffalo, New York, St. Paul Episcopal Church, and I'm on the Social Justice Action Team, which includes climate justice, and we're digging as deep as we can into climate justice in our area. We have small things like a pollinator garden and trying to be a zero waste church, and also working with the river keepers of the Buffalo River leading to Lake Erie and trying to cope with especially the plastic pollution in Lake Erie.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks for that good work up in New York. David Voits.
Yeah, David Voits from rural Iowa, member of the Northeastern Iowa Synod. I sit on the Care of Creation team for the Synod. Right now, we're in the smoke capital of the country. We have some of the worst air quality anywhere going on right now.
Keep fighting the fight, David. I'm sorry to hear you're going through that. Go with
I'm sorry?
Bob. Yes, keep fighting the fight. I'm sorry you're going through that. It sounds really challenging. Kick it to Bob Arrett.
I already did an introduction.
Never mind, Bob. Thanks for correcting me. Mark Carlson, have you gone yet? I don't think so, but maybe.
No, not yet. Thanks. Mark Carlson, Sacramento, retired state public policy director for the Lutherans and active in our Care for Creation team at St. John's Lutheran. I'll just say I'm jazzed. We're not in the footprint. We're not in the conditional use permit, but very small Kansas landowner, but I got an invitation to the launch of Sunflower Wind, I think, pulling the switch in late September in Marion County, Kansas.
Great. Thanks,
Thanks.
Mark. Lisa Brenskelly. I pronounced that right, Lisa?
You actually did, and almost no one ever does. Kudos to you. Lisa Brent-Skelly from Houston, Texas. I'm a member of Christ the King Lutheran. I'm the head of the Lutherans Restoring Creation team for the Texas Louisiana Gulf Coast Synod, and I'm the founder of the Interfaith Environmental Network of Houston. I'm also the climate communication coordinator for Texas Impact, which is the justice advocacy organization that represents all Lutherans in Texas. That's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. Let's kick it to Deb Martin. That one I feel confident about.
I'm in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and the whole state is under air quality alert because of the fires in our northern neighbor, Canada. I'm on the Synod Council for the East Central Synod, Wisconsin, and also the chair of our Synod Hunger team for the ELCA. And glad to be here.
Thank you, Deb. Elizabeth Christian.
I'm coming from the traditional and contemporary lands of the Clallam people on the northern shore of the Olympic Peninsula, member of Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. And on Sunday, we celebrated the kickoff of our third season of monthly farm church at a regenerative farm on the banks of the Elwha River.
That's great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Wilbur, I don't believe you've gone yet.
I'm Wilbur Holtz. I serve in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I'm a part of our Synod Council for the South Dakota Synod.
Great. Thank you, Wilbur. Larry Erickson, how are you tonight?
I'm Larry Erickson from Manhattan, Kansas, member of First Lutheran Church and professor of chemical engineering at Kansas State University and involved in Lutheran Restoring Creation.
Thanks, Larry. So, Gay Rodriguez.
Another nice job with the name. Nobody gets my last name. And sometimes not even my first. So Gay Rodriguez from Whidbey Island, Washington State. I am a Stephen ministry leader and minister at Oak Harbor Lutheran Church. And I think that one of the reasons I am interested in creation care is I do have 10 grandchildren, but 5 of them are older, but I have grandchildren that are 8 to 14 years old, and we live in a beautiful place, and I want them to appreciate where they live and to care for where they live.
That's awesome, Gay. Thank you. Naomi Just, unless it's used. You are muted, though. There we go. Maybe.
But we still can't hear you, Mom. That's my mom, and it is Naomi Just.
Okay.
And she was having computer problems earlier. So she is, I know, on Massachusetts land as well. I love her, and that's why she's here, but I know she has her, if you want to write in the chat, Mom.
Thanks for the assist there, Phoebe. Nice to see you, Naomi. Thanks for being with us tonight. Jane Afonso.
So I come from the Tongva land in LA. I'm at First Lutheran Torrance and chair of the Green Faith team for the Southwest California Synod. It's really nice to meet your mom, Phoebe. Thank you for being here, Naomi. And we're having a problem with sick and dying sea lions and dolphin. And so we helped rescue one, but in general, we're doing more education to have people stay away from them because, yeah, it's really sad. And it's from an algae bloom.
Thanks for doing that work, Jane. That sounds really challenging, emotionally heavy on top of everything. Doug Debrick.
Yeah, I'm Doug Debrick from Athens, Ohio, Christ Lutheran. I'm on Jeannie's Earth Justice group and also outgoing chair of the Social Ministry Committee.
Thanks, Doug. Gabrielle, my classmate from Wartburg.
Hi, Gabrielle Brown, coming to you from New Haven, Connecticut. I serve on the New England Synod Green Team and the Rocky Mountain Synod Creation Care Team.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Gail Johnson.
Yes, I'm Gail Johnson, and I am on the public witness team for the Northern Texas, Northern Louisiana Synod. I'm another Texan on here. I am really interested right now. One of the reasons I joined this is it's just my first time actually, but I'm really interested in hearing what they have to say about Sabbath.
Awesome. Thanks, Gail.
Mm-hmm.
Kathy Smith.
I'm on the Cool Congregations cohort facilitated by the Lutherans Restoring Creation group out of Houston. Participate with the Climate Reality chapter at Thurston County, Washington, and I'm the facilities manager at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church on the ancestral lands of the coastal Salish people in Port Angeles, Washington.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kathy. Gail Johnson, have you gone? I believe you've gone.
I've gone, yeah.
Okay, great. Then we've got Galaxy Tab A remaining, which is in a call full of unique names, maybe the most unique.
Hi, I'm Myra Keel from Baltimore, Maryland. I'm on the Delaware, Maryland Senate Creation Care Team, and our church has a covenant to be a creation care congregation, and I'm a member of St. Philip's Lutheran Church.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Awesome. It's great to hear everyone's voices, even if we can't be there in person with each other. Thanks for speaking out into the space. And with that, I will kick it to Kaylie to take us away.
Yeah, thank you all. It is so great to meet you all in this space. And I hope that, whether or not we are ever in this space together again, or you hear your neighbor's name spoken again, that we are just reminded in this moment that we are a strong network of creation care advocates, and our network is far and wide. So we are never alone in any of the grief, frustration, anger. We're in this together with all of our joys and hope, and even in the times of despair. So don't ever forget, this calling can be exhausting, it can be lonely, and it can be isolating, but there is a network of people here. And I think a little bit that's what Baird and I had in mind when creating this project. We are both going into ministry and our ministers in the church, which is already kind of exhausting. And then we are doing this creation care work and advocacy, and it can be exhausting and lonely. And so we really wanted to figure out, how do we lean into this idea of Sabbath intentionally? And I think when Baird opened us up, it was important to note that we aren't experts at this. We certainly have way more questions than answers, and we will make a lot of mistakes before we can kind of fill our rhythm and get it right in our own terms. And so when we're talking about Sabbath, it is intentionally coming out of the Protestant lens, where our Jewish siblings will have a more in-depth and their own kind of version of Sabbath. And we are just kind of adapting from it and learning how to do Sabbath within our own context and culture. But I think we can still really learn from our Jewish siblings. And one of the quotes that I wanted to mention tonight comes from Abraham Joshua Heschel, who writes the Sabbath, its meaning for modern man. And his quote is, "The world has our hands, but our soul belongs to someone else. 6 days a week, we seek to dominate the world. On the seventh day, we try to dominate the self." Talking about Sabbath is not only for ourselves, but it is also for creation. It's a rest from us doing work in creation, putting pollution into the world. And so we're looking in our work of Sabbath as a meaningful rest, safety for ourselves and for the world. And so when we're talking about Sabbath, it's kind of that term that we always just throw around and toss around and assume people know. But Sabbath can be so broad. So we're breaking it down into this idea that the Sabbath is intentional rest, which can include feasting with yourself or neighbors, eating a good meal. It can be about communing with yourself or your neighbor, and it's about reconnecting. And so this idea of Sabbath is really a tool for regeneration and regrowth for yourself. With that, Sabbath, right? I told my congregations today, like, it is so easy to preach on Sabbath. It is much harder to practice Sabbath, in part because our world and systems aren't set up for us to rest, right? We are actively trying to fight against a working culture where we are judged and based worthy on our productivity. And our God says, no, you're not worthy because of all the work you do. You're worthy because I say you're worthy, that I've already claimed you holy and beloved. And so taking Sabbath sometimes feels impossible. It seems daunting. It's heavy because our world is set up to make it that way for us. And so we're really trying to lean into, like, how do we individually practice Sabbath as resistance for sustaining our calling in the church, sustaining the place that the church holds in this world, and sustaining the earth, right? Because this work that we do, all of our concerns, emotions that we pour into this work is so crucial, and we have to be able to keep it going. So Sabbath is an act of resistance, and it is quite possibly the most holiest things we can do is to take rest. So with that, the idea that Sabbath is at least one day, if possible, to take a full day. Maybe some weeks we take little pockets out of every day, 30 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever kind of rest we can get to enter safety. I think that's important to note, that Sabbath is about safety. It gives you a safe place, a moment, a pause, like Phoebe had read in her devotional, this holy pause to heal yourself, to be healthy, and to recover from whatever the world has been throwing at you. And just another note from an unknown Jewish rabbi. I've been trying to find his name, but it's just been quoted as a Jewish rabbi saying, the Sabbath is to safeguard the world from people and to safeguard us from capitalism. So I think that's just another note that, like, how crucial it is to kind of resist being productive for like one day of the week, or maybe it's only an hour, whatever we can offer up. But as we continue to talk about what the Sabbath is, it's just this time to offer a new hope for reclaiming our lives. And that's kind of, I know I hope I didn't just like waterboard you all with a bunch of words there, that something soaked in about this idea of how do we sustain our hope in this world and in this calling. And I think that can be Sabbath. We can see Sabbath as a chance to reclaim our lives from the sins of this world. And so I will kick it back over to Baird.
Thanks, Kaylie. I think that's really well said. Part of the motivation behind this is a recognition of some broader trends that we're noticing in the climate justice space, is that the increase in anxiety and depression and anger and fear that is driven by learning the realities of the climate disaster. We know that takes a measurable psychological toll on people. Psychiatrists and therapists are discussing the incredible increase in rates of specifically climate anxiety and climate grief. And people are scrambling to try and figure out ways to respond to this in meaningful and constructive ways. And part of the issue is that the magnitude of the climate crisis is far beyond the scope of any individual humans to, by their own actions, completely alter it. And that is that's great, Doug. Yes, Rest is Resistance. We have some other books that we can recommend to you as well, if reading is a place where you find some encouragement. the issue really at hand, I think if we go down to the core of this, Rabbi Jonathan Narrow, who is a rabbi working in Israel, but who is deeply engaged in climate activism, he wrote the Eco Bible commentary on the first 5 books of the Bible. It's a really good if you are a scholar or a regular preacher and you need a commentary on the first 5 books of the Bible, check out Eco Bible. But he talks about climate change as yes, an economic, and yes, a biological and physical issue, an issue of atmospheric science. And ultimately, it is, from his perspective, a spiritual crisis. It is what we see as the outpourings of our economy, as the outpouring of our political arrangements, are ultimately outpourings of our spiritual posture to the world. And our cultural spiritual posture to the world is one of anxiety and consumption and scarcity mindset, which the Sabbath, specifically looking at its history throughout the scriptures and how it's been applied in Jewish communities in particular, is explicitly put against the anxieties of those systems. If you look at the original Sabbath laws, most of them have to do with agricultural work. And if you are a group of people working in the Middle East to grow food to feed your families, where if something goes wrong, everything goes extremely wrong, you can see where that might be like the chief anxiety that you deal with. And so having a practice that specifically prohibits you from scratching that itch and putting your faith in God, both is revolutionary on a spiritual level, but also the fact that that gift is made available to animals, to servants, to people who have no power in society. And it is the duty of the community to defend the rights of all those folks who don't have standing in other ways from the demands of constant labor, is really significant. The reason that we view Sabbath as a climate action in particular, not just as a personal spiritual practice that might help you in your relationship with God, is that it disrupts our relationship with time, which disrupts our relationship with the economy and our communities around us. And the economy that we have now is the biggest barrier to sustained and deeply meaningful climate action. The disruptions that are expected to be caused to the largest firms in the world really motivates them to be oppositional in a lot of ways to the kinds of technological and practical interventions that need to happen in order to work down greenhouse gas emissions. But if we as a spiritual practice choose not to participate in the economy, that both changes the spiritual realities that we live in, and it has economic impact. You could imagine it as going on a general strike once a week. And if, obviously this is pie in the sky, but there are 2.2 billion Christians in the world. If 2.2 billion people chose to opt out of participation in the economy for 1/7 of the time in a sustained manner, oh boy, that's going to bring down some changes. Not only does that put external pressure on the firms that are most well positioned to take advantage of our economic and political anxieties, it also forces us to do this in a community space. The Sabbath was never meant to be something that one person gets to do as kind of their reward for hard work. It's something that the community gets to do because that's what God has offered to us. When thinking about the practical applications of this, is obviously this is a challenging thing to present. The world, as Kaylie mentioned, is moving so fast and keeps on screaming at us to keep up. And the reality is the planet and our souls need to slow down. But thinking about how to do this in community, I think, is very important. It was always a communitarian law in Jewish practice. And I think that it needs to be understood as something that communities take on for themselves. And I think that congregations are a good place to start applying that. The example that I keep coming back to in my mind is if you have single parents in your congregation who can't take one of their prescribed days off work during the weekend, completely off from housework as well, It might be up to the congregation to organize kind of collective childcare so that parents who need to get the shopping and some of the chores done so that they can rest with their families later on. That might be a responsibility that the church takes on collectively in order to empower one another to participate in and receive the gift of the Sabbath. The reality of the climate crisis demands urgency from us in a way that our culture has primed us to respond. We are told that everything is a right now issue and that if we don't do it, then no one else will. And in some ways that is true. We need to take responsibility. All of us are needed. But this is also a culture that tries to tell us that we are valuable because of what we produce. And that has led a culture of deeply anxious people who are worried about their sense of self-worth, always trying to produce in order to gratify that sense of self-worth. We as a culture need to make a shift, and that doesn't happen from a bunch of people quietly doing this in their closet. This happens in a community that's inviting other people to participate in the gift. This is a call to radical change that none of us know how to do particularly well. But it's something that I think we need to figure out how to do. And that starts by identifying the need and emphasizing the problems that poses. We're going to move into small groups in just a moment. I know that was a real drinking from the fire hose kind of approach to this. There's so much that could be said about the history of the Sabbath and the way that it's applied today in Jewish communities or in Seventh-day Adventist communities. Those groups that have really clung to that as a key part of their religious identity. I'm not trying to minimize the significance of that. I'm just trying to recognize that we have a set amount of time for us tonight, and I'm happy to share some resources towards the end. But I want to open up the floor before we move into small groups for any just initial reactions. We'll try to keep this phase down to 2 to 5 minutes before moving into larger conversation. And if people don't have anything to say to the group right now, that's also okay. We can just jump right into small groups if need be. Thanks for stopping by, Brother Ken. We appreciate it. And Lisa, I see you've raised your hand.
I was just going to say that I think a certain amount of intentionality is required to make this happen. And in our society where we are constantly feeling pressed and stressed, it's really hard to take the time for that intentionality. You're going to have to, I don't know, you have to kind of, I don't want to say force the issue, but you know what I'm saying. You have to somehow push all that other stuff aside to make this happen. And I think, at least for me, recognizing the difficulty of doing that is important. This is not an easy thing. So to me, it's important to recognize that Sabbath is not easy.
Yes, absolutely. Hopefully the Sabbath can be a gift for us, but it's something that we have to organize our lives around. See a couple other raised hands here. Tor, hop in.
Oh, since you mentioned it, I'm just going to reinforce it. You got to think like a single parent. Every minute of your day counts, and you can't split attention when you're playing with your kids.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Just the last part of that. You can't do what with a...
Oh, you can't split your attention. If you're focused on your kids, you're focused on your kids. Doesn't matter what's on the stove or what everything else is competing. Somebody calls, yeah, they're going to wait.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Tor. Any other initial? David, hop in.
Since you're speaking about kids, where does youth sports on Sundays fit into all of this? Many parents almost all parents that have kids doing anything are running around on Sunday to take their kids to these activities.
I 100% agree. Part of the issue, I think, is that we culturally are very permissive around that. I'm not advocating for going back to like puritanical ways of being like militant against one another, but culturally we need to be able to have a conversation about what the higher good is. And other communities of faith have consistently chosen to opt out of the cultural mainstream in order to maintain their faith practices. I'm thinking of Orthodox Jews. I had a Seventh-day Adventist teammate in high school who couldn't compete on Saturdays, and it was a disruption. And I think that we, as largely, are the ELCA is historically a quite white Anglo-Saxon Protestant denomination. We have been the cultural mainstream for the bulk of our history, and we need to get comfortable with stepping outside of that. Hop in, Mark.
Yeah, I think it was Kaylie that said Sabbath is safety, and that just drew me to the hymn that's in the book of worship, Thy Holy Wings, which is very traditional in our family, and that sense of safety and shelter. And I'll just add that I think there's a major court case going on around Seventh-day Adventists and work requirements. Now, you would think that had kind of been resolved, but apparently not. So gotta admire them for their conviction.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Well, Sharon. We'll go to you, and then we'll break into small groups after you hop in.
I think it's very difficult for those of us who are caring for a seriously ill family member or someone on hospice. I think it's very hard. My husband was in the hospital for a month, and caregivers were there on 12-hour shifts, having to give up their day. And thank God they were there. They saved his life. But at the same time, I think we need to develop in our world a way where somewhere during that day, even if it's only a half an hour, that we find a way to set up time for someone to just step back and be able to do something. You know, I grew up on a farm, and if you didn't milk the cows, they wouldn't survive the day. And that's okay. You know, God gave us cows for a reason, and we need to do that. But we also need to give people a roadmap, I think, of sorts. How can you do this and take that time?
You are absolutely right, Sharon. I love Phoebe's comment. Hers is I call it pockets of Sabbath, but hers has so much alliteration. It's beautiful. Sips of Sabbath. I think that is very important to note. Like, I'll just share I take pastoral care counseling from somebody else who cares for me. And she would tell me, she's like, why do you set your expectations for one full day? Why not start with an hour a week? And then that way, when you nail that goal, you feel really great about it, and you feel less guilty about it. And the weeks where you can't take more than an hour for yourself, then you're still right on target. So I love that sips of Sabbath, right? Find those little moments throughout the week, whether it's 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, or if you get a full day, thanks be to God, take it and rest and be quiet. So I love it. Sips of Sabbath, beautiful.
Thanks, everyone. We're going to break into small groups now for a little bit more detailed conversation. We'll leave you with some prompts, but wherever your conversation leads you is the way that it was supposed to go. But a couple questions to stir your thinking when we break into those groups is when we talk about Sabbath, what are the first kind of images and practices that spring to mind? Those can be positive or negative associations. We just want to hear from folks what Sabbath occupies in their imagination so that we can start thinking about how to apply it into our lives differently. How do you find hope day to day? Where do you find hope day to day, especially when engaging with something that is as frankly terrifying as the climate crisis? And lastly, Sabbath can feel impossible. How can you find those pockets of Sabbath, or what would need to change in your life? What kind of awareness would you need to bring? What sort of planning would you need to implement in order to make Sabbath a more durable reality for you in your practice? Sound good? We'll give you all 10 minutes in those breakout rooms. Phoebe's gonna
I'll broadcast those questions in case you want to remember them, but yeah, 10 minutes and then we'll come back for a prayer to close. Is that okay? Ready? I'm opening all rooms. You might have to click join.
Thank you, Phoebe. We'll see you all soon.
I hope it's working. Yay, look at that.
They're poofing out as they go, so I think it's working.
Time. And Baird, I think as I couldn't assign us to a room. I don't know why.
Oh.
Yeah. And Mom, do you see a join button? Maybe. Yeah. Hit that. Oh, you should definitely, if you need your asthma spray, you should use that.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. I want to be respectful of people's time as we've been talking so much about the importance of it. So I'll open it up. If there's anything that was talked about in your small group that you're just like, man, people have got to hear this. Now is the time to share it, which is some pressure. So make sure it's a nugget. And then we'll close with some prayer.
You can always write it in the chat too.
You can definitely write it in the chat too. Gonna give a 10-second countdown for people to jump in if they've got something. All right, Sharon.
We looked at the history of our churches, and out west and in New England, we had the same problem. Once the blue laws were gone, everything just went downhill from there. And thinking about setting aside a whole day, is that making capitalism worse for us because you try to make up for it the other 6 days? And I said something about, how about a Sabbath moment a day? And why are our churches never open except for a funeral, a wedding, and on Sunday morning? I know there's a horrible fear in this world of danger, but I would love to advocate for, let's have a prayer time. It's optional. People can just go to their own church or to a local church and be able to share in prayer on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or Tuesday and Thursday, something. So that if you want that ability to go to a quiet, pensive place, you can.
That's great, Sharon. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom and your attention with one another this evening. It's been a real gift for me to see everyone's faces and hear everyone's voice and get to share this time together. We'll close in a prayer that sounds like a call to action, but is, I think, also a call to having the courage to rest and be still. It's a prayer of good courage. So may the Lord be with you. O God, you have called us to ventures to which we cannot see the end, by paths as yet untaken, through perils unknown. Give us the faith to go out with good courage, not knowing where you're leading us, but knowing that your hand is guiding us and upholding us wherever you are leading us. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. And in the spirit of Sabbath, I'd like you to know that I won't be hosting the next couple of months' meetings. Our friend, Sister Jessica Zimmerelli, will be. So I'm taking the advice and taking a sabbatical. So thank you all so much. And I'll see you in a couple months. I'll still be here, but take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.